as much time as possible. But welcome today, everyone, to Trees Matters Lunch and Learn. Today we're going to be going over co-creating plant communities in Phoenix with our presenter, Julie, and I'll be turning it over to her in just a minute. But just if you are new to Trees Matter or have not heard of us before, we're a local Phoenix Valley-based nonprofit with a mission to foster and inspire an increased, more balanced tree canopy throughout the valley. And we have a few different programs. Our Shade Tree program works with SRP and City of Mesa to distribute trees to homeowners in those areas. Our planting programs is we plant trees at parks, residential areas, and schools throughout the valley, and I help run that program. And then our food forest program, which we have kind of been reinvigorating recently with some mesquite food forest events and also some educational content around food forest. So follow us along, and hopefully you'll be seeing more food forest programming. And so we started doing these lunch and learns just this summer as a way to, it's super hot outside during the summer. We're not planting trees, but we want to keep people engaged. And we also want to provide educational opportunities to people on topics that we think the community will find interesting and also that we find interesting. And also we want to build our tree team, which is a dedicated group of volunteers that are passionate about growing as environmental stewards and volunteering with Trees Matter. So this is a way to kind of spread the word about that as well. So if you're interested, it's very simple. It's just kind of our recurring volunteer system. So if you attend multiple volunteer events with us, and you can get a shirt, a special shirt and a hat, and we'll do some specialized training. And we also have social events and various learning opportunities. And some of our upcoming just general volunteer opportunities that we have a lot of tree measurement and evaluation coming up, which this is run by Jacob Ivy. And so all of these dates are upcoming opportunities, a lot at schools and some parks, early mornings throughout the week. And if you're interested in this, it's going out and checking on the health of the trees. So we're not just planting them, but we're going out now, during some of the hottest times of the year to make sure that they are being watered, that they're being taken care of, that they're establishing the way we want to see them establish. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for one of these events. And then a few other events we have coming up. We're hosting a game night. And we're going to bring hopefully as many tree related games that we can get our hands on. And so this is going to be September 10th from 6:30 to 8:30 in the evening at our office, which is in downtown Phoenix. And that's open to anyone. We'll have some more flyers and information being sent out and posted on our socials about that soon. And then fall is approaching. We're getting towards the end of August, and once we hit October, we're going to be in our busy event season. And so our first tree planting is Saturday, October 10th, and this is a residential tree planting, and we have mini tree plantings coming up. So yeah, just as we cool down, keep an eye out on our social media and our website for our shade tree volunteer events and our planting volunteer events and anything else we might be offering. And with that, we are going to turn it over to our speaker today. So today we'll be hearing from Julie Stromberg. Julie is an ecologist, botanist, writer, and researcher in the Sonoran Desert ecoregion. Julie holds a bachelor's and master's in botany from University of Wisconsin and a PhD in ecology from Arizona State University. Has taught for many years at ASU, but now is a tender of the land here in Phoenix, Arizona, where she inhabits a co-created oasis that serves as a food forest, tree climbers playground, habitat for birds, and mitigator of heat. Today, her mission is to help city dwellers form loving and respectful relationships with plants, wild and domesticated alike, who sustain them. And so we're going to be hearing from Julie about how we can co-create these habitats in our own space here in Phoenix. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Julie. Welcome.
All right, let me start sharing. Thank you for that. Sharing. Oops. Okay. Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. Co-creating plant communities is something near and dear to my heart. And so let's just jump right into some definitions. I'm going to start with a couple of definitions. So we're talking about co-creating plant communities. And a plant community is simply an interacting group of plant species coexisting in a shared space. And they can vary in growth form, lifespan, the component species, and growth form, lifespan, phenology, environmental tolerances. And so those are plant communities. And then what do we mean by co-creating? Well, by co-creating, I mean that we humans are not the only ones doing the planting in our urban spaces. There are many other creatures and abiotic forces that are dispersing seeds, be they wind or water, birds or mammals. And collectively, the seed dispersal that is happening from all these forces increases the diversity in a plant community. And if you do want to read more about this, once I retired from ASU, I decided to get into some sort of semi-popular science writing. And so I wrote a book about our adventures in this co-created space in South Phoenix that we've been doing for almost 30 years. So you can check that out if you like. And I am going to draw partly on our 4 acres in South Phoenix as I go through this talk, some of the lessons that I've learned. Now, when I was teaching ecology at ASU, one of the concepts I taught about was this notion that like, what is the relationship between plant species diversity and ecosystem functions, such as biodiversity support, climate regulation? And in general, data suggests that these functions increase as a function of the number of species in the plant community up to a point. They eventually, the curve eventually tapers off. But if we can increase plant species diversity in our urban spaces, I mean, most of these data have come from experimental studies as well as wildlands, but it has relevance to urban settings as well. So if we can increase the diversity of our plant species in our urban spaces, we can increase these functions that we desire. So what I'm going to do in this talk, I have about 25 species or so of plants that do seem to be thriving in Phoenix, and I want to go through them by growth form. Talk about a few examples of species in each of these growth forms. So we've got a lot to cover, but I'll just do a few species per growth form. But we're going to start with the annuals. Now we talk a lot about, when we talk about increasing plant cover in cities, be it on private places or private gardens or public green spaces, we do focus on the trees, and trees certainly are important. But I just want the point of this talk is to broaden that concept out and to include all these other growth forms and types of species that are in a plant community. So I'm starting with the annuals. And a lot of people that garden, like if they're sowing in seeds, they might sow seeds of the cool season annuals, like the California poppies and the lupins. But there also are some really important and delightful summer annuals, the warm season annuals that are popping up right now after the monsoon rains. And So one example of some of these warm season annuals are the spurges and sandmats in the Euphorbia genus. And to some people, to some gardeners, like anything they don't plant themselves, they consider a weed. I like to call them volunteers or just members of the plant community. And sometimes these, if we call them weeds, we kind of undervalue them, but they're actually providing, most of the plants that are volunteering in our spaces are providing some sort of valuable function. So this Euphorbia maculata is one of the more common euphorbias that pops up in summer here. They do seem to be tolerant of a compacted soil in urban areas, and their seeds, their fruits become sticky when wet, and they can attach to vehicles or people, and so they disperse themselves widely without any help from us. Functionally, you can see here that they are very important in terms of cooling the soil surface. I took an infrared thermometer and the value and measured the temperature on the plant and then in the adjacent gravel just a few days after monsoon rain. So the plants were actively transpiring. So you can see the vegetated plant had a surface temperature. I mean, the vegetated part of this was my gravel driveway. Vegetated part had a temperature of 102, much hotter on adjacent bare gravel. So important for helping keep the area cool. And even they also play a role in sustaining pollinators, even some of these little tiny plants that have, they're really need to appreciate their flowers, you need a hand lens. But you can see here there's these plants have tiny nectar-filled flowers, and this one's, there's a fly in the Geron genus, a little bee fly that's slurping at the nectar. So they do support pollinators. Another annual that will volunteer in disturbed and irrigated spaces in the city is Atroplex elegans, wheel scale. They have these very distinctive seeds, and once you have seen them, you can use that as a key to identify the plant. These are valuable for cooling the environment, also for providing seeds that feed birds. A lot of sparrows and finches feed them. And a lot of birds in the Southwest are in decline, and urban gardeners, by providing a range of food sources for the birds, can play an important role in helping to sustain their populations. Now, if you want maybe some showier flowered annuals in your garden, and so in the seeds of plants such as Arizona poppy, which is in Calstromia grandiflora, which is in the same family as the creosote bush, gorgeous orange flowers. And if you want to know the kind of habitat that they will thrive in your urban space, you can go to a site such as SciNet, which is an information database where you can look up individual species. And if you scroll to the Southwest Field Guide tab and then look at the ecology section, here it says you can learn about the habitat to give you a clue as to where you should sow them, under what conditions you should sow them in your yard, or what microsites they might thrive in. This is found on desert flats, gravelly or sandy soils. So that gives you some idea of where they might thrive in your own garden. These are pollinator magnets. The insect I put on the slide here is a longhorn cuckoo bee, which is actually a kleptoparasite that relies on having populations of longhorn bees to sustain themselves. And so if you actually have these kleptoparasites in your garden, it's a good sign that you have enough of these solitary bees to sustain them. So that's pretty cool. So that's just briefly, that's all I'm going to say about annuals. A lot of them do show up on their own and have valuable roles to play. Moving on quickly to the perennial herbs. There are one of my favorites, and one that seems to be thriving in many areas of Phoenix, is desert cassia. And A lot of the plants that do well in urban settings are ones that you would find in desert washes, in say the mountain preserves. So where areas where you have a bit of disturbance, some open soil, and some periodic water sources from floods or rains. And these are wonderful perennial herbs. They have beautiful yellow flowers. They're in the legume family. One of the main pollinators is the valley carpenter bee, and the giant big black bees, and they do this buzz pollination thing, which is fun to watch and fun to hear, somewhat challenging to photograph. The desert cassias also support a variety of butterflies, which we're seeing these in our garden right now. They're flying around and laying their eggs. We have cloudless sulfurs, sleepy oranges, and the caterpillars on these can be sometimes cryptically colored. On the right there, you can see the caterpillar of the sleepy orange. It looks very much like the leaf of the cassia. The chrysalis can look like a dead leaf, and this is one reason one important factor to consider when you're co-creating these plant communities is sometimes as a gardener, we want to just clean out the dead leaves, clean out the dead stems, and make it look clean and tidy, which is important. But we have to balance that with making sure we're not removing we need to have tolerate a bit of messiness in our gardens, and part of that is because we don't want to make sure that we're not also weeding out these chrysalis as we're cleaning out the dead leaves. Another perennial herb that also can be classified as a subshrub because their bases can be a little bit woody are the globe mallows. There are several species in the valley. They can be very hard to key out to species. But this is one that had volunteered in our yard. When we moved in, there were no sidewalks along the road. It's a semi-rural, so there was some agriculture. So there was abundance of wild plants that would establish along the road edge. And those actually, because we have water running off the road and it's kind of open and disturbed, and those plants that habitat served as a source for plants to disperse into our garden. And so that's where the globe mallows came from. They attract a lot of, their flowers attract a lot of bees, and one in particular that is associated with the mallows are the mallow bees. And they're just adorable. You can find them sleeping in the flowers. This one looked like it didn't really want to be awoken just at the moment. But these bees are ground nesters, and if you're lucky, you can find these little turrets. And so when we're talking about co-creating a plant community, we're also talking about tending them and making sure that we have spaces where the bees can have their nests. And so you might have put out a little sign in your garden or your park that says, bee habitat, and have it be an area where people aren't going to be trampling too much. A relative of the globe mallow is the Indian mallow, Butylan palmeri. These have it. Another name is velvet leaf, and they have incredibly soft leaves. They're really, really soft. And just for that tactile sensory experience, it's an enjoyable plant in that regard. One of the butterflies that these are a host plant for are the Arizona powdered skippers. And I was reading about them, and it says that when the caterpillars are ready to overwinter, they make tiny sleeping bags by folding the leaves, the soft leaves of the velvet leaf over, and then securing them with silk, which sounds like just a lovely, cozy sleeping bag to overwinter in. But again, another reason to leave the dead stems, leave the plants, even though they may not look particularly attractive, they're providing critical habitat for wildlife. Penstemons are another great one for the Phoenix area. There are a variety of species. In the area that tolerate the heat, we seeded in a few species. The only one that formed a self-sustaining population was this peripenstemon. They do, in the wild, you can find them along canyons and rocky areas. And so we clustered some rocks together to create a little bit of this rocky canyon habitat, and they seem to be thriving. And after they germinate, they form these rosettes, which then form a flowering stalk with these gorgeous pink flowers, which attract yet another kind of solitary bee, which are the mason bees. And these fly they're very fast, they're small, they flash in metallic blue color, very gorgeous. And they nest in wood. So, for example, you might, they might be in old beetle burrows or rotting logs. You can also drill holes in old stumps to make an artificial nest box, which we did a few years ago. You can see on the lower left some of the filled holes or where the mason bee has nested. So in another tentative rewilding your urban garden is normalizing having stumps and dead matter and dead branches, perhaps artfully placed so they don't look like no one's tending the area, but just sort of normalizing having organic debris and wood piles as part of the area. That can be a challenge, but it's important if you want to maintain the diversity in your garden. A lot of people know about milkweeds. Rush milkweed is perhaps the most drought tolerant of the Asclepias in our area. We planted a few in our garden. A lot of people are planting them these days. Interestingly, the rush milkweed is one of the ones that's most closely genetically related to the milkweeds that dispersed from Africa to North America years and years ago. So sort of a basal member of the group. But they support, their flowers have nectar and support pollinators. And of course, they're a host plant for the monarchs and the queen butterflies, which is why a lot of people plant them. Which is a nice segue to move into the vine category. Now, I love vines. There's so many to choose from. Vines, some of them are annual, some are perennials, but they all are similar in having little tendrils that allow them to climb up a trellis or another plant or a dead tree. One that is very good at dispersing by wind around the Phoenix area is funastrum, climbing milkweed. And they can become very abundant. They're one of those plants that can thrive in the urban setting, especially if you are watering them quite a bit. But their flowers are gorgeous, sustain a lot of pollinators. Here's a picture of a queen caterpillar eating the stem of one of these climbing milkweeds. And they are able to sequester the cardiac glycosides, the toxins that are in the plant, and then that protects them from being eaten by other predators. So climbing milkweeds are a great vine. And then there are others that have somewhat larger leaves. This picture on the right here, there was a new subdivision that went in across the street from us several years back. And they created this very large trellis and planted coral vine. And perhaps the scale of this trellis is larger than most people would like to have in their property. But one really important attribute of these vines in an urban space is that they can quickly grow and cover a structure and provide the transpirational cooling and the shading. And so you can sort of have instant shade and instant cooling. By instant, I mean maybe in a year or two, as opposed to the 5 or 10 years or so it might take for a tree to provide that equivalent amount of shade. So having some vines in the mix is a really good idea. On the left side of the slide, you can see Virginia creeper, which is a plant that is widespread in North America. It's not just limited to Virginia. So this is here. It's climbing a wall at South Mountain Community College. There's also morning glories are fantastic. So some of these, the only one that has volunteered in our yard has been the vine milkweed. These others we've either purchased or sowed seeds ourselves. The old man's beard, this clematis, we were actually a friend gifted us one of these or two of these, and this is a dioecious species, so they have males and females, and we had just males at the beginning, and the plant sex is kind of wild, and one male one year decided it's going to produce female flowers as well, and since then we've had seeds, and now we have these vines in abundance, and they are a host plant for the metalmark butterflies, which are tiny little butterflies, but they flash this metallic color and they're just gorgeous. And another functional role of these vines in terms of aesthetics is that I talked about needing to have piles of maybe dead plant stems, like dead sunflower stems, or piles of organic matter, keeping that organic matter on site. The vines will come and cover these piles with their beauty. So it's a way of keeping habitat and having it look prettier than it might if it's just a pile of dead stems. Another one that's doing this in our yard is desert passion fruit. This is another one that a friend gifted us, sort of the old time gardening pattern of exchanging plants among friends. The plant is going to thrive in the area, so you gift it to your friend. And these have beautiful flowers, and they're also proto-carnivorous, so you can ask me about that later if you want. Ooh. Okay, so moving on to the shrubs. A really good starter shrub for urban areas is brittlebush in the sunflower family. And these are plants that you see commonly in the local parks. One near me is South Mountain Park. And in these areas, they're associated with disturbed sites, such as after a fire or after a rock slide. So when you have your disturbed urban site, add a little bit of water. You can have an abundance of these shrubs, and they live for maybe 20 to 30 years. And like other members of the sunflower family, their flowers host a variety of pollinators, be they a couple of mining bees down there who are multitasking, mating and pollinating at the same time, drone flies. But the brittlebush the leaves are drought deciduous. So in the summertime, the picture on the left is a springtime picture. And I should say the setting here, I volunteered at the Arizona Humane Society South Mountain campus as a dog walker. So they had these walking trails, but when I first started volunteering, they were heavily manicured, heavily pruned. They put herbicide down. It was landscape. There was just nothing but trees. They allowed the trees just to survive. And to me, when I see a landscape like that, I just see all these open niches. It's like, wait a minute, they're missing components here. So I asked the director if I could, on a trial basis, turn this area into a more wilder, but perhaps also messier looking area to provide enrichment for the dogs, because you get lizards and birds and bunnies and things. And so he said yes. And so that's been an adventure over the last few years. One thing that's important to do in such settings where people are expecting to see some very manicured habitat, and they see maybe some plants that look a little scruffy. You see dead leaves. Some people just think the area is not being tended, and they think it's messy. So I put up some signs. The picture on the right is just to remind people that's brittle bush during the summer. I took that a couple of days ago. That's just to remind people that these are wildflowers, and the beautiful flowers will come back in the spring or the fall. So just please be patient. Another key shrub for this region is creosote bush, one of the most physiologically drought-tolerant shrubs around. Has evergreen leaves, very tough leaves that allow them to continue photosynthesizing even when the temperatures are high and the water level is low. And wherever I go, I like to document the creatures I see and upload them to iNaturalist, the iNaturalist platform. And so I was walking dogs one day and I saw this katydid. It was on one of the dog kennels, and it turned out to be a creosote bush specialist called the creosote bush katydid. So that was kind of exciting to see these specialist plants in an urban setting. But the creosote bush, to get back to the concept of plant species diversity and maximizing functions such as overall carbon capture, overall cooling of the environment, the creosote bush, because they can grow in habitats in your urban space that are drier, maybe away from whatever irrigation source you're using, they can survive in microsites that some of the other plants can't tolerate. And so having them in the mix allows the plant community as a whole to provide more functions than it might otherwise. Let's see. Also, before I move on, if anyone does want to become a nature trail volunteer at the Arizona Humane Society South Mountain campus, let me know, because I could use some more help in tending this urban green space. Let's see. If you're looking for plants to support hummingbirds, tuberosa is a great plant, and this is one that is available in the commercial trade, and it's widely planted already in the Phoenix area. But they have opposite leaves, sort of grayish stems, and then these red hummingbird type flowers that are filled with enough nectar to sustain these highly energetic little birds. Now, the reason I put a picture of a western orb weaver spider in the corner of the slide here is to remind myself to tell you that I was so excited one day when a woman came over to see our garden, and she loved hummingbirds. Like, that was her into nature, like hummingbirds. But she did not like spiders, like a lot of people have arachnophobia. But when she learned that the hummingbirds use spider web to make their nests, she widened her welcoming sphere. And so now I'm not going to say that she loves spiders, but she tolerates them because they're providing the silk for the nests of these birds she loves. So that was kind of fun. Now, one shrub that is not very much in the nursery trade, but I think it's starting to become more so, is this elephant tree. These, I think that one of the northernmost populations occurs in the South Phoenix area and South Mountain Park. But they have evergreen leaves, which a lot of landscapers like, beautiful bark, and they're a great shrub for sustaining berry-eating birds like cardinals or phainopeplas. And going back to the early spurges I showed you at that first slide, which were very tiny flowers. The elephant tree also has fairly small flowers, and they provide nectar for a lot of small insects. So here's a marine blue butterfly that's nectaring at their flowers. So really, and perhaps most importantly is these plants produce chemicals in their berries and their stems and leaves that are proven to be to reduce anxiety when we breathe the aroma of these smells. It actually does reduce our stress level. So that's a good enough reason right there to plant these lovely plants in the Burseraceae. Another shrub we planted in our yard is desert hackberry. Another one that's great for the birds, Aber's towhee, and others eat their orange berries. And these also have these thick, drought-tolerant leaves. They're evergreen. Also, these are the host plants for American snout butterflies, which in some monsoon years you just get these swarms of American snouts, which is really cool to see. And they do have these wonderful looking faces. The one on the picture here is one that's actually laying an egg on a desert hackberry right there. So they are breeding in our area, which is good to see. We don't want a garden to be a sink to attract creatures that are coming in and not reproducing, draining the population. So these are actually, we have several species that are breeding in our area and then dispersing to other sites. And the more green spaces we can have in our area with these diversity of host plants, the better chances these creatures have for surviving and thriving in our cityscapes. So desert hackberry is in the cannabis family, Celtis pallida. The netleaf hackberry is in the same family, Celtis reticulata. And these trees are starting to be used more in the urban setting too. These are wonderful trees. We planted 3 of them in our garden 25 years ago. I wish we planted more. They're awesome. They are fairly drought tolerant, but still have fairly large leaves. So they're providing a lot of shade, also a lot of transpirational cooling. And so they grow moderately quickly. So you can see that the size of that trunk for this what's now a 25-year-old tree. They host the same butterflies as the desert hackberry, including this Empress Layla, which is quite beautiful, and also provide the berries that feed the birds. And of course, there's velvet mesquite. This is one of my favorite trees. I love them all, but perhaps I love velvet mesquite more than some of the others. Because we do have a food forest on our 4 acres, and we harvest a lot of food for ourselves. The pods of velvet mesquite also provide food for these round-tailed ground squirrels as well as for mammals. They are great places to join with their friends and climb trees. And the velvet mesquite, as opposed to some of the other mesquites, has a more spreading growth form, and so you have these side branches that will actually come down and touch the ground and be close to the ground. So it's important. The pruning of urban trees is very important, and I think some of these, the growth forms of some of these trees are not necessarily appreciated by some landscapers. They want to turn everything into our idealized view of a tree just being a single trunk and very tall, but these actually are almost more shrub-like and having multiple stems that sprawl on the ground. And then the legumes, including mesquite, these legume trees are host plants for a lot of moths and butterflies. One in particular that has been hanging around our front porch lately is this black witch moth, which they're huge and gorgeous. And this one actually flew into our house the other day, which was a little bit of a surprise for both of us. There are a lot of desert legume trees to choose from. The blue palo verdes are great. And again, here's some example of a pruning that allows the branches to spread and kind of create this little tent uh, of coolness. It can be challenging to find the wild type Parkinsonia florida as opposed to some of the cultivars that are in the trade. So that can be one challenge. Quickly moving through these, one of the Parkinsonia species, but we'll say that we planted the blue palliarides in our yard from seeds that we collected. And then a Parkinsonia that volunteered in our yard was this Rotama, Parkinsonia juliata, which is sometimes called Mexican palo verde. And these are kind of fast-growing, sort of riparian-ish trees. Beautiful flowers, like some other flowers. They do signal to the bees, and once the flower has been pollinated, they will turn red, and then the bees see that as gray. So that's kind of a clue that, oh, you don't need to come to this flower. It's already been pollinated. But one other important point and sort of challenging point, I guess, is the importance of, well, these trees can provide functional value while they're alive and also while they're dead. And so I'd love to see us sort of normalize having standing dead trees, or at least dead branches on the property. Is there are bees like this cactus wood boring bee that right there in its name, it tells you that it's nesting in wood. So we had one of these Rotamas that died, and it was just filled with nests of these cactus wood boring bees, which was really fun to see. Another challenge of using some of these Sonoran Desert native species in our yards is that many of them are prickly, thorny, spiny. Desert ironwood, beautiful as they are, and hosting so many pollinators. I have fairly high tolerance for spines and thorns, but this one is actually kind of almost a little too spiny for me. But I guess that's a personal decision then. Now, we did plant another fairly thorny plant tree that we planted was the catclaw acacia. And these have a lovely smell in spring, which is just delightful perfume. And the spininess of this tree is one that attracts verdins to build their nests in. Verdins are a fairly common desert bird, Sonoran desert bird, and they build these nests, and they select trees such as the catclaw acacia because they are spiny enough to secure the nest. And when these winds go through during the monsoon season, and some of the wind's velocities are getting higher and more frequent as the climate is changing, but the nests are more likely to stay intact if they're sort of pinned down by the spines of the tree. So that's one functional reason to have these in your yard if you want to have the verdins in your yard. Another cool acacia is the sweet acacia. And these provide habitat for ornate tree lizards, metallic wood boring beetles. The more you get out there and the more you look, it's just amazing. We were just amazed at how many of these creatures just showed up in our wild space that we had no clue that we would have this much biodiversity. So that's moving on. Let's see, it's 12:45, gotta wrap up here. We have two more growth forms to get through, and I'll go through them pretty quickly. Succulents are good to have in your co-created urban plant community. A lot of them do actually need a bit of shade and a bit more water than you might expect. When we moved in, there was a population of Opuntia engelmannii, prickly pear, in our yard. And presumably this was part of the local wild population. And so there are these wild Sonoran Desert plants that persist in areas such as the local desert mountains, along some of the road edges and in agricultural areas. And they are reservoirs that will can populate these new developments that are going in if we allow them and appreciate them. The one thing that can be a little bit unsightly about these prickly pears is when their pads do die. Some people might dispose of them, but they actually, if you keep them on site, they will create habitat for creatures such as the longhorned cactus fly, whose larvae feeds on these pads and puts the nutrients back into the soil, completing an ecological loop. So I like this notion of being an ecological gardener and appreciating ecological cycles. And one other succulent that I really like is the agave murphyi. These agaves are one of the most drought tolerant agaves. They're the species that grows wild in the Salt River, the lower Salt River basin. And they were cultivated by the Hohokam people. And when ours finally bloomed after 25 years, I was surprised to see that the flowers don't actually set seed, but they produce bulbils. So they're producing genetic clones of themselves that you can just go out and plant a whole new generation of agaves, which is kind of fun. So the very last growth form I want to get to is the grasses. The grasses are actually a family, but they have such a distinctive morphology. People consider them to be a distinct growth form. And they're a good part of the, if you want to diversify the number of plant families, it's great to have grasses in the mix. We sowed some Aristida purpurea, the purple threon, but even Bermuda grass will serves as a host plant for a couple skippers, like the fiery skipper butterfly. And they also provide a food source for this bug here is a scentless plant bug, but they're providing food for all these for many herbivorous insects, which in turn sustain predators. So if you have enough plants of different growth forms and of different plant families, and you have the herbivorous insects, herbivorous birds, then you have predators of predaceous spiders and owls and hawks and dragonflies. And so that's a real indicator that you've achieved sort of this ecological gardening guru status. So that's those are we've worked our way through the growth forms. So I just want to wrap up here and tie back to the concepts introduced at the beginning and say that we can increase the plant diversity in our cities especially if we adopt this approach of co-creating plant communities, welcoming what some people might dismiss as weeds, but which are plants that are simply volunteers that have been dispersed by wind or water or birds or even our own vehicles or some of our own feet are dispersing these plants. More plant species you have, the more animals you have, and people are valuing biodiversity. And just to reiterate a point I made before, a lot of these insects and birds are in regional decline, and urban gardeners have a very important role to play in helping sustain their population. The water is funneled into the urban areas, and that's where a lot of the plants, the animals will go to in these times of drought. Now, when it comes to the function of sequestering carbon, capturing more carbon, and also cooling the environment through transpirational cooling, which means having high leaf area, plants with large, broad leaves. here's where irrigation comes into play. So having productive as well as diverse plant communities is going to allow us to maximize that particular function. In our own yard, we irrigate with salt river water. I know not everyone has that option, but there are still many areas in the city that do have this irrigation where you will see expanses of say grass and then a few trees where you could have more diverse and productive communities with associated signage and a lot of people getting in and planting and tending and educating. So that's what I wanted to present. I guess I didn't leave too much time for questions. I do want to mention this. I have a new book out. If you're interested in that, you can check that book out. Gets into this idea of appreciating the volunteers, regardless of what biogeographic region they came from. So, questions?
Thanks so much, Julie. There was one question in the chat that was, is the net leaf hackberry the one that grows out at Hackberry Spring?
I would have to guess yes. I don't know for sure. It's either going to be it could be the desert hackberry. I don't know.
Both hackberries are common out there.
Okay.
Another question was, what do you recommend to outcompete Bermuda on irrigated lots?
Yeah. Well, actually, in personal direct experience, there was Bermuda grass when we moved into our place. I just stopped mowing. And once you stop mowing, other plants can establish. The woody plants will grow up, and other herbaceous perennials will outshade the Bermuda grass. So stopping mowing and having plants that will increase the shade level, that did it for us.
That's great.
So it's more a question of what functional changes you're making versus what plants you have available, I guess.
Another question, is there a minimum size that becomes useful for insects like the wood-boring bee? Considering that a lot of dead trees are very young and thin, I would not expect them to be useful to insects.
Well, I mean, even a dead branch off of a tree, it can be useful. A lot of these, like the wood-boring beetles, the larvae are fairly small. I mean, they're creatures like the valley carpenter bee, which are fairly big. They actually make big holes. But a lot of these insects in our region are fairly small, so you don't need some huge piece of wood to be valuable.
Another question is, where is the best place to buy these native plants? Someone else did chime in with they got their natives at Scottsdale Community College plant sale.
That's a good one. Desert Botanical Garden is good. Also, I would suggest just cultivating a network of people that you know that have these gardens and getting into trades. Sometimes I know at some of the Native Plant Society meetings, they'll have like a trade day where people will bring in seeds or cuttings. So that's another option, because I mean, if you lived in Tucson, there's so many more options for buying these plants. Phoenix, it's still not really. It's challenging to find them.
We're getting there. Another one is, do you have a recommended approach for convincing HOAs to embrace including more native plants and doing away with Bermuda grass?
Yes, I would. I think if we talk about the current crises that we're faced with and the functional importance of plants, you can make a really good case that the city of Phoenix is increasingly becoming too hot to live in, as given the urban heat dome and the climate change. So keeping your area cool and shady is of critical importance. And so the plants that are on the accepted list for an HOA, the reasons for that are not necessarily based in protecting us from climate change. So, I mean, what we need is we need people to get together and provide informational material for people that live in HOAs, so they can have like a fact sheet of here's why these plants are valuable, and that just needs to be something accessible to people so that they can take it to their own HOAs.
Yeah, someone shared a resource, AZ Native Plant Society, with the link aznps.com. So that looked really well. I don't see any other questions as of the moment. So if anybody does have another one, there was something up here earlier that kind of goes. Someone had said the city asks us to remove debris for fire prevention, and then the landscaper also likes to remove debris. It's quite the dilemma, as I would like to leave it for wildlife. I don't know if you have a device there.
Yeah, and that's if you can, that's where the vines can come into play. Like if you have a pile of say dead branches or some dead stems, and they're covered with vines, that the fire needs dry material to burn. So if you have these living vines covering up your organic matter pile, that's less of a fire hazard. But yeah, I mean, these are questions that we need to have sort of focus groups of people working on and come together and collectively have strategies to counter some of the challenges.
Yeah, someone mentioned that talking with your HOA board, going to the meetings is even better, and then joining the HOA board is even the best so that you can go and educate them.
Yeah, exactly. And there are I've talked to people that have just simply raised the issue with their HOA board, educated them. I mean, if you approach it from a standpoint of just let's educate and let's discuss, why have you selected these plants in the first place? Can we change them? And here's a good reason to change them. So it's all based in a calm, educational approach. And these, I've known cases where the HOA changed because they saw the reason, there was a good reason to do it.
Right. Looks like we have one last question, and is having wood boring beetles on your dead tree in your dead trees an attraction to have them start on your house?
I guess it depends on what your house is made of. Most of the insects, the bees are kind of selective as to where they're going to build their nest, and so I mean, our house is slab and plaster, so find out what your house is made of, and so possibly, but most likely not.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Well, and someone else said it was nice to know spaces like this one exist. So thank you for your presentation. If anybody else has any more questions, feel free to go ahead and ask. But this meeting is pretty much over and everybody's good to go. Lots of praise for you, Julie, in the comments.
Yay. Yeah, and we do occasionally open our place up for tours. We have the Native Plant Society started a garden tour, and we opened our place up for that this spring. So we'd love to use.
Great.
Yeah, just keep an eye out for that.
Someone asked me if this will be available, this recording, and it will be. We're gonna upload this to YouTube, and I can go ahead and send out an email afterwards and just send you guys all the link too.
All right. Thank you again for inviting me.
Yes, Julie, thank you. Okay, well, I am gonna quit recording here.